a young girl at school. She's kept the faith all of these years. Distinguished elders of the community, and my in-laws, Dr. Diane, brothers, sisters, comrades and friends, Assalamu alaikum. I can't tell you how good I feel to be back here, where I spent so many years and worked so closely and with so many of you on this question of Palestine, on the issue of Kashmir, against the first war on Iraq, exactly 20 years ago, against the sanctions on Iraq, against the second war on Iraq, against the war in Afghanistan, in defense of justice and liberty around the world, in defense of the Muslim people here in Britain and across the globe. I have worked with Mr. Shaheen and Dr. Kosar and many others of you. Some of you I took to Palestine, took to Gaza to meet the late President Arafat when he arrived for the first time back in Palestine. Mr. Sawar, Senior, I took to Tunisia to meet the President there, as well as to meet him in Jericho and in Gaza. And he has passed his apologies to me that he can't be with us this evening. I don't know if Mr. Sawar, Jr., Member of Parliament, is here, or if he has yet been to Palestine, but I'm sure that he has followed in the footsteps of his father on this subject of Palestine, which is very, very dear to all of our hearts. Now, as others have declared themselves from this afternoon, I too am a candidate for the Scottish Parliament for the constituency of Glasgow. But I'm not going to talk about what I'm going to do, because such talk is vulgar and cheap in advance of elections. Neither am I going to talk about what I've done, because that would take too long, because Palestine has been in my heart for more than 35 years. And in any case, the chair kindly, in his introduction, talked about some of the things in which I've been involved. I want to confine my remarks to an analysis of how we got here in Palestine and where we need to go. But first I must make reference, obliquely, I hope, in the spirit of the evening, to some of the things that have been said about it. I'm not a friend of Israel, critical or otherwise. Israel is a racist apartheid state, and not until Zionism, the political system on which that racist and apartheid state has been built, has been defeated by a combination of the resistance of the Palestinian people themselves as the hammer and the international solidarity movement with Palestine as the anvil, not until Zionism and the apartheid state of Israel has been broken. Is it possible that a Palestinian state can emerge? And I have news for some here. Gaza is not Palestine. The West Bank and Gaza are not Palestine. The West Bank and Gaza and what they call East Jerusalem is not Palestine. Palestine is the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea that bound for a group of white European settlers. This is the core of this question, you see. The British, I don't need to tell you, Shaheen Saab and some others lived under it. The British had an empire so vast that upon it the sun never set. But as my Irish grandfather used to say, that's because God would never trust the British in the dark. He was right about that. But even by imperialist standards, what Balfour did on behalf of the British government and people in 1917 was absolutely unique. Because Balfour, on behalf of one people, us, promised a second people, the Zionist movement, who at that time represented a tiny sliver of international Jewish opinion, land which belonged to a third people, and which Britain at that time did not even yet possess as an imperialist possession. So it gave away somebody else's country, which even as an empire it did not possess. Unprecedented, unique, even by imperialist standards. But the Palestine that was given away was not the 23% of Palestine, which the Oslo Agreement, signed with such fanfare and panoply, offered kindly back to the Palestinian people. Palestine is the land between the river and the sea. And by the way, the Palestinians are not just the people living in the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem today. The Palestinians are the people who live between the river and the sea, and the millions of Palestinians living in exile as refugees around the world who have the right to return to their homes. The absolute legal, never mind moral, that's a given. The absolute legal right to return to their homes, to their farms, to their houses and their lands, whether they are on one side of the Green Line, as it's called, or another. So I don't believe that any kind of two-state solution, as has been referred to, is either possible, because if any of you think Mr. Netanyahu is going to give the Palestinians a state of their own, which would be anything other than the Bantustans of Transkei and Ciskei and North Botswana and other so-called homelands that the apartheid state of South Africa tried to buy off the African majority in South Africa. Anyone who believes that Mr. Netanyahu and his foreign minister, Mr. Lieberman, who demands that the Palestinians sign an oath that Israel is a Jewish state. Imagine asking people who are citizens of a country to sign an oath that they accept that other people in that state are superior to them as citizens. Even the Ku Klux Klan would never dream of asking the American blacks to sign an oath that America is a white country. Anyone who believes that Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. Lieberman are going to give a Palestinian state alongside Israel will believe anything. Living in cloud cuckoo land, a parallel universe. But that's not the only reason for rejecting this so-called two-state solution. Because the only solution which is morally and legally capable of resolving this issue is to have one democratic state from the river to the sea, in which the Muslims, the Christians, and the Jews live as equal citizens of the world. With one man, one woman, one vote, electing one government, one constitution, where no section of the population is superior to the other. And it must include the right of all the Palestinians to return to their homes. Because if anyone thinks that they can sign an agreement which leaves millions of Palestinian refugees outside in camps or in exile in distant places. How distant? I was recently in Canada after a long legal battle to be allowed to return to the country. We went to the Arctic Circle, to a place called Yellowknife, where it was 47 degrees below zero. I was standing in the middle of the third biggest lake on the earth. I was standing on the middle because the ice was 20 feet thick underneath my feet. And living there in Yellowknife, on the Arctic Circle, are 5 Palestinian refugee families. MashaAllah, they now have many children born in the Arctic Circle, but they have the right to return to Haifa, from which they were driven and forth by the illegal European center invasion. And I, for one, whoever signs what, will never give up that fight for those families and all the millions of others to return to their homes. I hope I haven't been too rough on others, but you wouldn't expect me to give a speech which didn't honestly tell you how I see things. Tomorrow, I'm going to Beirut. I hope the war doesn't break out. I'm going to Beirut tomorrow. Why? Because we have a press conference to launch the next flotilla, which will sail for Gaza on the 31st of May, the anniversary of the massacre of the Navi Marmara of 9 heroes, martyrs from Turkey, murdered on the high seas by Israeli commandos on our last flotilla. We will never give up. Until they lift this siege, we will break it. We've broken it by land, as has bombing. We will break it by sea. Keep it to yourself. We're even going to break it by air. We have an airplane that can land in 250 meters in a street. I even know which street we're going to land on, but we're not going to announce that yet. This struggle will continue until the siege is broken. Why? First, because it's immoral to starve people's children, to punish them for how their parents voted in a democratic
democratic election. It's immoral, and of course ranks us all as hypocrites. We're told that we're fighting for democracy in Afghanistan or in Iraq. We're told we invaded Iraq to bring them democracy. Well, the Palestinians had democracy. They voted in a free and fair election. Unfortunately, they voted for a party that Britain and America and Israel didn't like. Let me be clear. I say this for the MI5 man in the room. Would you like to stand up? I say this for the MI5 man in the room. You know, if it was otherwise, I would tell you the truth. I am not a supporter of Hamas. I have never been a supporter of Hamas. I was always all my life with Arafat. But I am a supporter of democracy, and the only people entitled to choose the leadership of the Palestinian people are the Palestinian people themselves. Nobody else. Absolutely nobody else. And they chose a government, and we began immediately. There were no rockets, by the way, from Hamas. They began this siege the day Hamas were elected in a free and democratic election. Look it up. Look up my speech in Parliament in 2007. It's on YouTube, dealing with this introduction of this siege, long before there were any rockets. We can call them rockets, ineffectually thrust into the air, landing in fields, harming almost always no one at all. When Israel invaded on the 27th of December 2008 and began the 22-day murderous assault on Gaza, there had been a ceasefire for 6 months, which was broken by Israel, not by Hamas or anyone else. Look it up. This siege has been imposed on the people of Gaza only to punish them for how they voted in a free and fair democratic election. The only free and fair democratic election, by the way, there has ever been in any Arab country, ever in history, and which was described by Jimmy Carter at the time as pristine, crystal clear, transparent, perfect. That's what pristine means. So whilst I'm not with Hamas, I will never agree to starving a population because they vote for a party that I don't prefer. And the second point, which has to be made here, especially under the banner of the Friends of Al-Aqsa, there are far too many people, including Muslims, sleepwalking as Al-Aqsa is systematically and physically undermined. It's bad enough that the faithful people cannot pray there, cannot move from the West Bank to pray on Fridays in Al-Aqsa. The people of Jerusalem, if they're under 45, can almost never pray in Al-Aqsa. But the mosque itself, from which the Prophet, peace be upon him, ascended to the heavens, is being undermined by so-called archaeological works which are designed by the settlers to bring it crumbling down. Imagine how you will feel if you wake up one morning to hear on the radio news that the Al-Aqsa, from which the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven, is no more because it has collapsed as part of the deliberate policy of destruction which the settler state has been embarked upon now for many years. It's a real danger. Al-Aqsa is in danger, and the Muslims, above all, I address the Muslims, are sleepwalking on this question. Nobody's doing enough for Al-Aqsa. Ismail Patel and I have traveled over Africa, now I know over this country, talking about Al-Aqsa. It's wonderful that the Glasgow branch of Al-Aqsa, friends, is so big, but action speaks louder than words. You need to be telling your members of parliament, all of them, if they want your votes, that they better start making more noise about the danger to Al-Aqsa and the suffering of the Palestinian people. And thirdly, I seem to be fast running out of time. I make this point in conclusion. The unkindest cut of all. And this, I'm sorry again, I refer to an earlier speech. Hope you don't think I'm picking on it. The unkindest cut of all is that the Palestinians, who are the victims of terrorism, victims of a gigantic act of terrorism, are called the terrorists when the resistance called violence, which we must, of course, oppose all acts of violence. This equates the resistance of a man attacked on the street outside by a group of thugs who are determined to steal everything he has, and when the man defends himself, you say you're against all violence. Well, I'm not against the right of the Palestinian people to stand up and resist the theft of their